and welcome to the Fabulous Cancer Podcast. Today I'll be talking to Michelle, and we're going to talk about her cancer journey, how blogging helped her, and way more. So thank you, Michelle, for joining.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. Would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, and where you're from?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Burleigh. I live in a small town just outside of Toronto, Ontario in Canada.
Thank you. And which type of cancer did you have?
So I had a very rare form of leukemia called acute promyelocytic leukemia. And my understanding it is the most rare or second to most rare type of leukemia diagnosis.
Okay. And how did you find out you had cancer?
So it's a bit of a story. I felt fine up until about 3 weeks before my diagnosis. I was still working and I was still, parenting. I was still in the gym. And about 3 weeks before my diagnosis, after a workout, I had a muscle lock in my hip and it stayed locked for a number of days. So I actually went to the local hospital. They gave me some pain meds that made me feel groggy. So I went to my family doctor and switched up the medications. And once I started taking that second set of medications, I started bruising. 2 days later, I was covered in bruises and my blood vessels had started bursting. The next morning, I took myself to the emergency department at my local hospital. And 2 hours later, I had my leukemia diagnosis.
Wow.
Yes, it was fast.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yes, it is insane. The way, see, I didn't even realize there was a difference between acute and chronic leukemias before my own diagnosis. But the way that the acute leukemias work is that from the period of onset to mortality can be anywhere from 7 to 28 days.
Oh
So
my
it happens
God.
fast. Yeah, it happens fast.
That's crazy.
Yes.
It's like, and this is one of the things, right, that I'm thinking about as well, is like if you're dealing with something like that and your doctor is just, describing something for you because it's like easy or something, I feel like
Mhm.
why don't you just expect the worst to prevent the worst?
Yes, I'm with you on that. And I did end up calling her I'd called her twice within 3 days leading up to my diagnosis to explain what was happening with the prescription. And basically she told me it likely wasn't because of the prescription. And if I had any other questions, I should call the pharmacy. So my concerns about bruising and then my further concerns about bursting blood vessels was entirely disregarded. And I did end up filing a formal complaint with our College of Surgeons and Physicians here because the bottom line is with the mortality period, like I described earlier, that 3 or 4 days could have been the difference between me living or dying.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, I walked a little bit like limping, so I went to the
Mhm.
doctor, and they're like, well, maybe it's pain growth, so go to a physical
Right.
therapist. And then we went to a physical therapist, and they were like, well, your hip is moving in a way of someone who needs a hip replacement.
Oh,
And then we took a picture, and then the doctor said, well, she has a tumor. So I mean,
okay.
and that was like within like a week. I mean, I only found out really I had cancer, or I realized more I had cancer like another hospital because I just didn't pay attention to what the doctor said. But I
Mhm.
was like, wow, like so much went wrong. That's
Yes.
crazy. But we're gonna talk more about that in a second.
Yes.
I was just wondering, which treatment did you have?
So the treatment that I had was quite intense because I was considered high risk APL. Um, and at the time of my first bone marrow biopsy, my bone marrow composition was already 90%, meaning I had almost no platelets, very low red blood. I had no clotting agent left in my blood at that point. So I was in really rough shape, and so they had to give me 4 doses of a chemotherapy called idarubicin, which is quite strong and completely knocked my marrow out within 2 days, I guess. And during the period of receiving those doses of idarubicin, I also started the first of 30-day runs of arsenic trioxide.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
You know,
that's a lot. Like it's I have the same with when you read it all back or you listen to all the things you've been through, you're like, wow, that's a lot actually.
it is, and it's funny because I say to people sometimes, who ask, what kind of treatment did you have or what was it like going through it? And I say it's with with a leukemia diagnosis, there are a number of different protocols that a person can go on, especially dependent on the type of leukemia. And I know, as an example, acute lymphatic leukemia uses a treatment called vincristine. The chemotherapy is actually called vincristine. And it's funny because, they might say, oh, yeah, I'm taking vincristine. And it would remind you of somebody named Christine
Right.
or, maybe Vin Diesel. But when people are like, oh, hey, what kind of chemotherapy are you taking? I'm like, arsenic. And it is the first time I ever heard it, it was terrifying. And during the entire course of the treatment, knowing that I have a daily drip running into my body of arsenic, and every time I've ever said it to anyone else, the reaction is no less um, shocked than mine was. It's just, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's a lot to think back and remember what my body was put through. But
Yeah.
I'm here and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's really good. So you have a blog to help others. What made you start helping others through and after cancer treatment?
It really goes back to the experience that I had pre-diagnosis. It was really hard for me to get the care that I so clearly needed. Between feeling like I was brushed off by my family doctor, and then when I finally did go to my local hospital, I literally had to fight with the triage nurse there to be seen by a doctor. I don't know why. I don't know, you know, I don't think I went in with anything other than, you know, desperately needing help. But for whatever reason, so what happened was the triage nurse said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm covered in bruises. I'm taking this medication and, uh, and I don't know what's wrong. And her response to me was, well, the doctor is just going to tell you to stop taking the medication. And I said, well, I did stop taking the medication, but my blood vessels are still bursting. I'm now hemorrhaging. My body looks like crime scene investigation, and I don't know why. Um, and and she was just really insistent on arguing with me over why it was that I needed to see a doctor, and I truly couldn't understand it. And I truly believe that if I was a less assertive person, I would have more likely gone home, let it go, and died.
Yeah.
And going through that experience with the medical system, and feeling so um, dismissed. I do not want anyone else to have to go through a situation like that. And I am determined to do everything that I can to prevent that from happening. And so I thought the best way for me to do that, especially while I was in the process of going through treatment, was to start blogging about the experiences that I was having and start raising awareness about these issues that are taking place within the medical system, and more importantly, what people can do to protect themselves.
Yeah, that's really good because I feel like the same with with certain things. Like for me, I had a misdiagnose after the cancer diagnosis for not having cancer because they did a biopsy. And then I broke my hip in bed, and I was in a bed for 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so they thought the blood would come together, and then the bone would heal. And then after 6 weeks, that didn't happen because, well, it was cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many things that happened with like as well with like blood transfusions and things. I remember one time I had an unstoppable nose bleeding, and my dad knows everything from like blood counts to chemo, which type of chemo and everything. And the doctor literally gave the phone to him, and he's like, well, everything, so it's better you talk to the doctor in the hospital in Amsterdam. So I absolutely understand what you're saying, and as well with it's the reason for me. I did a episode, I think it's called Checkups, which is basically about checkups and seeing like my experience with checkups. Like it's really important how things are going in the Netherlands and how they treated me, because they were very, very strict with seeing me every 2 weeks, every month, every 6 stuff. And I know people who are, above 18 who had like cancer and who then start to have a cough after cancer. They were declared clean, and then they start to cough, and the doctor gave them antibiotics, and eventually it was lung cancer. And I'm like, how, and the guy passed away now. And it's so important to talk about like whenever there's something with me right now, I'm clean for 15 years. I go to the doctor and I'm like, I need a scan,
Yeah.
And even my doctor says it's probably 99% clean, but just because of your history, we need to do a scan,
Well, exactly. I totally understand that. And, to your point, the further I went through I spent about 5 months almost daily in the hospital taking treatment. The first month as an inpatient, and then the following 4 months as an outpatient. So I spent a significant amount of time in the hospital. And my experience started with me having to advocate for myself as a patient. But as I went through the motions, I will say that there were a great number of medical professionals who were absolutely fantastic with me. The hospital that I was treated at, it's called Juravinski Hospital. It's in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'm pretty sure that they hire the people who work there straight from the heavens. They are amazing human beings. All of them are amazing human beings. So one of the observations that I also made while I was in the hospital was the treatment of the medical staff by some of the patients, right? And the bottom line is that I think that we need to be more compassionate with each other. I think that we need to be kinder to each other. I think we need to be more patient with each other, and we all need to advocate on our own behalf, whether that be as a patient, whether that be as a medical professional, whatever the case may be. We are all humans, and we all have a right to be here, and we all have a right to be treated with dignity and respect. And so if that means making sure that we are asking our medical professionals questions and holding them accountable to their duties, then that is something that should be happening. And if it is a matter of medical professionals who have to hold their patients accountable to their part in their own journey, then that is something that should be happening too. We all have a responsibility in this, and I think we all need to do a better job of making sure that what needs to happen is actually happening.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's very easy. I think as a patient, it's like you're expecting that the hospital and the doctors and the nurses know what they're doing and it's their
Mhm.
job, and so therefore you don't go into it. It's like a child and a teacher who's like, okay, well, the teacher's probably right. But at some point you also have to think for yourself and be like, okay, I think it's this and that, and you have to keep pushing sometimes that person. If my doctor wasn't like this, I would get another doctor,
Yeah.
or I
Yeah,
would go to
absolutely.
another, yeah. And it's your health, and it's
Yes.
very interesting to see like how much um responsibility you have to have as well for this. I mean, there
Mhm.
even, yeah, it's
And the thing is that I think that at one point in history, the expectation was that doctors were solely accountable for our care. We people were taught that we don't really ask questions, we don't really question the doctors, we don't challenge doctors because doctors know all, and so we don't do that, right? But this is most, especially in I don't know about everywhere else in the world, but in Canada this is definitely shifting, where a general practitioner is starting to become more of a reference point, rather than the expert in all things, right? So there really needs to be a shift in terms of the type of relationship that we have with our doctors. It is not solely their responsibility to ensure our care. We are equally as important, and quite frankly, it is our own lives, and therefore, whether we think that it is their responsibility or not, if something isn't happening that we feel should be happening, it's our life on the line.
yeah.
And so it should be our responsibility to ask the questions. It should be our responsibility to advocate for the care that we believe that we need.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because one of the articles that I wrote on my blog, I called it um, transitioning. I believe it's called transitioning from an inpatient to an outpatient, and what you need to know. Because as an inpatient, you work with the same nurse practitioners, the same nurses for a number of days. And those nurses have a limited number of patients that they deal with. They know all of your medications inside and out. They know all of the diagnostics that need to be done day in and day out. They know the eccentricities of each one of the patients that they work with because you work with them for an extended period of time. But then you go into an outpatient environment where, those nurses can be dealing with 10, 20, 30, 60 patients in a day. And to have the expectation that those nurses know all of the ins and outs of a patient's care, all of the ins and outs of the patient's medical history, all the ins and outs of the patient's current medications is simply unrealistic.
Mm.
But when you go from an inpatient to an outpatient and you're in the middle of the whirlwind, these are not things that you necessarily think of, but it's really important. It is really important to understand that the nurses that you were dealing with are not the same as the nurses that you're currently dealing with. And therefore, you need to have a deep understanding of the treatment that you're receiving because mistakes can happen. Right? So you should know what treatment you're taking. You should know what supportive medication you're on. You should know if you need an ECG before you start your treatment. These are very important things for a patient to know in order to avoid avoidable situations.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really good that you say that, because I was just thinking about it as well. Like so many nurses have indeed like so many patients, so sometimes like, oh, maybe you have this or that or something. I'm like, like, oh, we're gonna place the feeding tube or something. I'm like, no, we're not,
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't planned to do that. I mean, even they make mistakes. And this is also for I mean, for you were an adult, so it's a little bit different in a way, because you are the person who's doing it. For
Right.
me, it was my
Yeah.
parents.
Oh,
But
for sure.
it's the absolute same concept. Like my dad was so, and even now, like so prepared for everything. At some point, I had to get when I got my prosthetic hip surgery, they said like one of the it was like a social worker, which I thought was very strange, but I had like a social worker, and she's like, oh, we can do the I don't know the words in English, like the numbing stuff to make you sleep.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Through the portacat, through the thing on. Is that called portacat in English?
You're talking about through an IV, through an intravenous.
Yeah, the port. Oh, I think it's just called
Yeah.
port. Yeah.
Right.
And my dad was like, well, I don't know if that's possible, so I had like numbing cream, which is called MLab, by the way. If you, I hope you have it international. It's the greatest thing in the world, for needles and everything.
I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, it's called EMLA.
Okay, thank you.
At least it's in the Netherlands, but I'm sure it's international. And he was like, well, I think we also need to put it on our hand, the cream, because you never know. And she's like, no, it's all done. It's all secure. Don't worry about it. And he's really thinking, it's literally 1 minute work. It's just cream and a sticker on it, and you wait for an hour, and it's like numb. And she's like, no, it's fine, just there. And we get to the surgery, and this is the chaos part, because the doctor was like, no, we can't put it through the port, because we need to do it through the hand. And of course I started crying, and I was like, oh, I don't want to have a needle and stuff, so it's absolute chaos. And this is for parents, it's like it's the exact same thing. There's so many things you just need to be careful with, and also with other things I can't even remember, but so much happened with oh yeah, I remember, like, actually my oncologist, who's absolutely incredible, by the way, but she came to me, she's like, well, this is your last chemo. And we were like, no, it's not. I have one more chemo to go. And she's like, nope, this is it. She showed a card and stuff, or and we were like, no, we need one. She didn't count it right. She's like, yeah, so great, great treatment, and went home. And I said to my mom said, we were in a car, and my mom was like, there's no way that, my mom was super confused, because my mom's like, no, there's no way. Like, I'm sure you need another chemo. So I said, just like, well, yeah, I'll see this hospital in like, 2 weeks or something, and I'll come back, And I still and then the oncologist came, and she's like, yeah, I'm sorry, you needed one more chemo. She gave me a plush toy, so I got like super hyped. I still have it, but things like that, it's like, it's so important to, and also don't be afraid to ask your doctor things. If you have questions about anything, ask them, make a whole list. If they're being weird or awkward, it's not your problem, because it's their job. So just ask, and yeah, it's very important.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Thank you so much. So have you ever thought about starting your own business?
I actually have, and it's funny because, I've spent nearly 20 years in finance, either banking or investments, and I've never really had a desire to be an entrepreneur. And then something interesting happened about 4 months into my treatment. My oncologist approached me. So we have the Canadian Cancer Society here. That's a national nonprofit organization. They are phenomenal at raising money for cancer research in Canada, and they have a campaign that runs every year called Daffodil Month, and that's April of every month, of every year. And they had approached my oncologist and asked him if he would do an interview with them, and asked if he would bring a patient with him for the interview. So he approached me to do that news interview with him. And, I figured, why not? The ironic part about that is that I've spent my entire life being terrified of talking to people. But I think one thing that I've learned throughout this journey is you only really get one life, so you might as well live it, regardless of fear. So I did the interview with them. The Canadian Cancer Society saw the interview. They were really happy with it, and they approached me and asked me if I would do a speech at an upcoming award ceremony that they were holding later on that year. And of course, I said yes to that too, because why not? And that really sparked something in me, doing that speech and being there at that award ceremony and seeing how sharing a story with a group of people could impact them personally was invigorating for me. So I've spent quite a bit of time doing volunteer work, as much as I could throughout my treatment anyway, working with a number of nonprofit organizations in Canada, and started the blog and had done some writing. I've had a couple of articles published over the last year or so also. And as these activities have started happening, or had started happening, I was noticing that there were people who were actually coming to me for advice as a patient. So kind of working on this thought process, I've definitely thought about opportunities that exist in terms of how I can continue to help the patients in terms of advocating and being more assertive to help them out in their own care. But on the other side of the coin, I've also thought about how I can help healthcare organizations in framing their patient programs in a way that is more patient friendly. I think one of the shifts that's happening here in North America right now is that the healthcare framework, both in the U.S. and in Canada, actually has always been a very business-centric framework. And it's starting to shift here to a more patient-centric framework, which basically just means what can we do? It's going from what can we do to achieve our business targets to what can we do to provide the best care for our client, who is the patient. And if there's something that I've learned throughout my career in finance, is that we may think we understand what a client needs, but unless we actually sit in the patient's or the customer's shoes, we don't really truly understand what they might need from us. And so I have most certainly thought about how I can help out in the healthcare space, both with my business background and as well with my firsthand patient knowledge, to help these organizations build patient programs and service models that are more designed to the actual patient's needs.
That's really incredible. And that's what I see a lot, like, well, not a lot, but I see it quite often now, is that the healthcare or medical world is more interested in the patients and be like, okay, how can we improve our system? You know,
Yes.
we have it in the Netherlands for a childhood oncology hospital called Prinses Maxima. And
Yes.
they're really dedicated to improving the life of kids during treatment in the hospital. Like, they can have sleepovers with their sisters or their siblings, and they have, like, they can eat all the food they want at any, I think 3 times a day or 6 times a day because of the chemo. There's a lot of stuff to do and stuff, so it's really like, I mean, I'm glad I'm not 11 with cancer anymore, but I mean, if I had cancer, that would be like, it's wow, that's incredible. It's such an improvement. So yeah, it's really cool that you have the ability to do that, and that that people, that you can work with these people. That's really incredible. That's really good.
Thank you.
So where can people reach out to you and contact you?
Absolutely. So, as it stands right now, if anybody is interested in reaching out to me, they can either do so through email. My email address is Michelle_Burleigh@hotmail.com. Okay. And so they can either reach out to me by email, or they can also reach out to me through my website, which is www.soyouvegotcancer.ca.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, I will put all your contact information in the description as well.
Excellent.
So people can reach out to you. And Yeah, I had one more question because you have on your blog as well that you have patients or survivors tell their story
Yes.
on your blog as well, right? Is that also
Yes.
just the same email where people can reach out to you if they want to share their
Yes,
story?
absolutely. And if anybody would like to share their stories on my website, I would be happy to have them. I think one of the really super important things as it relates to cancer care is to give people a safe place where they can find information, feel supported, and feel like they can be heard. And that's one of the things that I really seek to do through the website and sharing the survivor stories. And if anybody is interested in going onto the website and checking out the survivor stories that are there, you'll see that each one of the survivors who has shared their stories to date actually provide their diagnosis, their story, as well as their contact information, so that if anybody who is reading through those stories resonates with those stories, they have the ability to reach out to them directly also.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. And do you, is it for international people as well or just Canada?
Oh, absolutely. So the website is the majority of the content is currently geared towards acute blood cancers.
Okay.
However, as I've kind of moved through this journey, I think that there is a greater need. So by all means, if anybody wants to share their story, I am happy to share it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Super nice and, to hear your story and your experience and all the work you do. It's really, really awesome.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Super great. Well, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you want to reach out, go to instagram.com/the Fabulous Cancer Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.